This episode is brought to you by Portland Distro. If you love underground music and movies, go to portlanddistro.com for licensed shirts, vinyl, CDs, and more. Go to portlanddistro.com. Plug in the discount code MikeHill666 for 15% off at portlanddistro.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of the Everything Went Black podcast. Before we get started, I want to thank our newest members to the Patreon squad, Alexander and Kristen. Thank you very much. If you're interested in bonus episodes, early access to the regular shows, and miscellaneous stuff like that, head over to Patreon, sign up for the Everything Went Black podcast Patreon. You can also go to everythingwentblackmedia.com and a window pops up that'll take you to the site. For as little as $1 you can join, or as much as $5. You can become a member. Each level has its own perks, but at the very least, you'll get bonus material, most likely 4 bonus episodes a month, so you get basically two episodes a week now. At level $5, you get early access. Welcome back, Peter Farris, author and musician. Pete was on the show way back when he was promoting his first novel, Last Call for the Living. He's coming back mostly to catch up and talk about his forthcoming novel, The Devil Himself, which is available right now in France. So if you're listening to this and you're in France, do not hesitate to pick up this brand new crime fiction novel by Peter Farris. If you're living in the States, this is available for pre-order, and we talk about that in the show. So without further ado, here we go.
Yeah, it's been a rough fucking time, man, honestly, but, trying to pull through.
Yeah, same here. We dodged a few bullets with family obligations, Christmas stuff going on, everyone trying to act like everything's okay, and then like getting some COVID outbreaks a couple of days after the fact. I know you had it, right? November, around Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I had it around Thanksgiving, like a little bit before Thanksgiving, so I was able to see my family at least, which is good.
That's good.
Yeah, but I mean, tons of people around me just got whatever this new variant is, and but no one real. Everyone seems to be having a pretty good recovery from that, so it's not too bad, I guess.
Yeah, I had one close friend who was fully vaccinated, had a booster as well, and got kind of wrecked for a couple of days by Omicron. He had 104-degree fever, just a flu-like funk, but he came out of it, and he wonders if he wasn't vaccinated how much worse it could have been. So he can only speculate, but we dodged a few bullets. But I have a 6-year-old in school, and every day we're getting alerts that he's got a classmate down, or substitute teachers are coming in, and staff is dropping like flies, and I just feel like it's any day now, so
yeah,
just ready to just give myself over to this contagion and get it over with.
Yeah, actually, it's funny. Just a few days ago, I got contact tracing got in touch with me, and they were like, I was exposed at some point over a certain range of dates, and so I just went to get tested, and I'm negative. But the doctor at it was one of those urgent care places, and the doctor was saying that, just for your own information, we don't recommend you even getting tested unless you have like symptoms, which I found to be interesting because I don't know, like for pretty much the entire pandemic, I was getting tested every 2 weeks, and I've been negative the whole time. And then after I get vaccinated, that's when I got COVID. So
go figure. My son's pediatrician said the same thing. We gamed out. I asked him a hypothetical. He comes home with it. We're all maybe having mild symptoms. Is it even worth bothering jamming y'all up, running around trying to find a test? He said, no, treat it like a crud, a cold, a flu, carry on, ride it out, and just, move on with your lives. So that's kind of the point we're at. He said it's like trying to stop the wind at this point. So
yeah, I think that's kind of like how we're going to proceed past this thing eventually. if I'm no epidemiologist, but from what I read prior to this pandemic, if you ever read Guns, Germs, and Steel, they talk about pandemics like in South America and North America and everything, and and back in the 1800s, it seems like you read all these like Westerns and people are dying of like consumption
Everything.
or whatever,
Yeah.
and these fucking weird diseases. And it's like disease is not something, it's something that we've overcome as a species. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm not like getting on some anti-vax like tirade, but it's the natural order of things, man. And like, it happens every 100 years and you just got to ride it out.
Yeah, at this point, I feel a lot more with therapeutics, vaccines. There's ways to protect yourself, milder variants, assuming, I don't know, the dark throne vaccine doesn't emerge and kill us all in the next 6 months or something. But 2020 was just like the diciest year. And with a young son at home, older parents, my dad's in his mid 80s, my mom's in her 70s. So it was a lot of stress worrying about that. But I feel like we've turned a corner, rounding the corner, finally, finally rounding the corner.
Yeah. Right on, man. So, I'm going to do an intro off, after this, and we'll just kind of get started now, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah. Pete, I just wanted to get it straight. Like, I don't know if we actually met back then, but I remember playing with your old band, the Farewell Order. And I think that was the first exposure to you was back then when it was someplace in Connecticut and it was us being Anodyne, Harkonnen, and you guys. And it was like, I think during the day or something like that. Is that your recollection as well?
Exactly. It's funny. I just told my wife this story. Yeah, the Farewell Order, Harkonnen, Anodyne, maybe one or two other bands. It was in Hamden, Connecticut at a venue that I don't think is there anymore. It's not the Space, which is a newer kind of happening club, I think. But Harkonnen didn't have their drummer because I think he broke an arm. So they had a snare drum and an inflatable doll and a drum machine playing with them. And that was one of our earliest shows. We weren't a band together very long, but great memory, man. I remember that show well.
Actually, what I believe it wasn't even a drum machine. I think it was the isolated drum tracks on a CD.
Yeah,
they just played it through like a Discman or something like that into the PA.
Hey man, they were making the best of it. They were in a jam and they played anyway. So hats off.
Yeah. No, that was cool. I was really stoked to see those guys play, and I the reason why I remember like my awareness of you, because I thought the Farewell Order was an awesome band too. Actually,
thanks, man. Thanks.
Yeah, and if I'm remembering the timeline correctly, that's when you were going to Yale, right?
Yeah. I graduated in 2001 and moved back up to Connecticut to sort of make a go of it in the Farewell Order, and lived up there in an apartment with our bass player, and just played, recorded for about 2 years, and it just kind of timed out, and it was time to move on. Then I'd met the guys in Cable and started playing with them too. That evolved into me moving back to Georgia and like remotely, as you saw in the studio, just joining them whenever possible. But Farewell Order was kind of a short little 2-year run, and we gave it our best shot. But man, you know how hard it is.
Yeah, no, I love that, like that era of. I feel like a lot of people go through that point in their lives where they're playing in kind of hardcore-esque, hardcore adjacent bands or whatever in that scene, where you do a band for a couple of years and it's like really intense for like a really short period of time, and you release like a 7-inch or a demo, and then it's done, and then you move on to some other thing, and that's always like a very interesting point in someone's life, I think. But I'm trying to make some context here. So you are originally from Georgia, right?
I am. Yeah, I was raised in a suburb, Cobb County, in Marietta, Georgia. So
I think I've been to Marietta actually. I played a show in Marietta.
Yeah, and you guys have played Atlanta in the past with Tombs and Anodyne, I think, going back, if I remember correctly. But I was raised in the South, but prior to that, I lived in Memphis, Tennessee, and I spent my whole life down here. So
cool. Were you when you were in Cable? Because then a few years later, you showed up as the vocalist of Cable for a while, and that's when I think we actually met. Yeah, like for real, like legitimately, like shook hands and met as two men in our adult lives, you know what I mean? So, and you were at that time, you were traveling between the two places, or were you living in Connecticut?
Yeah, I kind of was doing some stuff with cable around 2003 and made a decision it was time to move home. But getting to know those guys, they became good friends. They wanted me involved in the band, and so I pretty much remotely, continued. They were always very hot and cold, of course. They'd be active and then they'd kind of go on hiatus for a while. But whenever they sort of cranked up, the engine and got going again, I was always asked to be involved. So I'd make every effort to go up there and take band photos, play shows, get in the studio. Usually rehearsal time, practice was, I was doing everything on my own, so they wouldn't know what I was going to do sometimes until I showed up in the studio to
Oh, wow.
cut vocals. But it was a weird way to do it, but we made it work for a little while. So.
But it was cool to definitely, like on the last Cable record, the last, release that came out a couple of years ago, it was really cool to have us, all of us, guys that were in and around the band on the same record, because I got to put some vocals down. You sang on it, Christian sang on it.
Yeah.
We had all these different, people contributing to the record. And I thought I thought that record was great, by the way. I thought it was really cool.
I just re-listened to it and it's held up great. And considering I think that was done kind of late 2019, November 2019, it was sort of, just a few months later, everything went sideways for everybody with a pandemic kicked into high gear just after the new year. So I look back on that record and recording it with just fond memories. And Cable always had a weird thing going on vocally. They'd have Bernie and Randy. Later on, I was introduced into the mix, and then starting with The Failed Convict, where Christian did some vocals and we had other guest vocals, it just turned into this like crazy sort of, the variety was always like all over the place vocally on those albums going forward. So it was cool to be in the mix all the time on that stuff.
Yeah. I had you on the show. Welcome back to the show, because I had you on like 10 years ago. I think you were a guest on this podcast. and that was around the release of Last Call for the Living back in 2012, or maybe you were on maybe prior to the release of that book. I'm not sure exactly. But that was the last time we spoke about writing and publishing and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. A lot of interesting stuff has happened. Plenty of despair and frustration and disappointment too. but I think the paperback had come out, I'm going to say like 2013-ish. And I was kind of in the wilderness at that point with the second novel, my follow-up, which is now coming out in May, and other stuff. I never stopped writing, but a French publisher got hip to my work and published Last Call for the Living, and then bought the rights to the subsequent books. And then things kind of took off for me over there. So I was like frozen in ice in the United States, just sort of banned to obscurity. And then in France, things were really taking off for me. So.
Man, I was just, thinking about how hard it is, to be in a band and trying to find a label to release your records, and, to make a record or to even write material sometimes. And I can't even imagine what it's like being an author in this day and age, especially, and trying to find a publisher, because it seems like less and less people are reading.
It's awful. Yeah, it's tough, man. It's a buyer's market. You feel like it's a dying medium and less people are reading. And so it's hard because, you need to find a literary agent. And again, as a buyer's market, there are a million writers behind you. Everyone's competing for this very small sort of market space. And it can be very despairing to go through that. And to draw parallels, because you've been over there, a lot of times in underground music, going back to the late 90s, early 2000s, hardcore, just extreme metal, punk, every genre, you'd struggle in the United States. You would be eating vegan potluck every night and sleeping on floors or in a U-Haul at a truck stop, playing for no money. Then you'd get an opportunity to go to Europe and you'd get treated remarkably well. By and large, I know there's exceptions. You'd get paid a decent fee. You'd get there'd be hospitality. You could go to Europe and it's no wonder every band from Sick of It All to crazy noisecore bands love going over to Europe, pre-pandemic anyway. publishing overseas in Europe is a lot different, and in France, it's like night and day compared to the United States. So I got really lucky, but man, I was privileged to just be able to go over there several times. My books found an audience, and yeah, I don't know, but I'm 10 years between books in America. So imagine going through the work of writing a record, and you need a label to put it out, right? You could put it out yourself, but you don't want to settle for that. So imagine waiting 10 years with this record on the hard drive ready to go, but nobody cares. That's kind of the position I was in. So
yeah, that sounds like really, really difficult to get through, and it's interesting you mentioned that about a label, because like, these days there's this very populist kind of movement going on with music, where people do things on their own, which is great. I think that's awesome. But if you're doing it alone with no support, it's so hard to distinguish yourself from the rest of everyone else out there who's, buying their own Pro Tools setups and, drum machines or whatever, recording records in the practice space. I do think you need a label to help promote and get the word out with people. So that obviously is the same case with a publisher too. Because there's tons of people out there with their blogs and like self-publishing and all this other stuff, which is awesome. Because I actually read a bunch of stuff that people, maybe it's not self-published, but very, very micro
small
publishers. Yeah, very small press stuff. That's a lot of what I read these days. But what I think has operating within like a genre, has that helped bring some readers to your work at all? Because like clearly you're in like the crime, gothic, crime kind of vibe. Is that a pro or a con? Like being a genre writer as opposed to someone out there who's just like not writing within any specific genre?
Yeah, certainly if you're maybe an avant-garde literary novelist, it's those are very small circles. I can't really speak to that world at all, but certainly in the United States, genre fiction is still popular. Fantasy, science fiction, crime, mystery, and thrillers, about just a big umbrella genre, is certainly I don't know how books sell compared to 10 or 15 years ago. It seems like every 10 years, things just seem to be getting worse and worse. In France, crime noir, crime fiction is hugely popular. So there's opportunity there for a writer if you want to be a genre writer. And I think it's great. I kind of look at crime fiction like I don't know, Gigi Allen would look at punk rock, or you'd look at hardcore metal. Like it can be whatever you want it to be. Like I just want it to be kind of dangerous. So I want crime fiction to be dangerous. I don't want to play by any rules. But there's the caveat is, to publish right now in this day and age, you do have to perhaps bend, and I don't know, you have to deal with whatever's trending in the marketplace, whatever the new rules are, and they seem to change all the time. And on top of that, publishing isn't a meritocracy. So you need a lot of luck too, just like the music world. There's a lot of great bands who work their ass off. They just can't catch a break. The Feral Order, not to say we were a great band, but it seemed like we were operating, remember, late 90s, early 2000s in New England. Things were starting to get kind of good for heavy music. Venues opening, lots of possibilities, more musicians around. But right when we broke up, it seemed like a year later, Headbangers Ball is on the air. Metal has this big renaissance. And even like extreme metal, Dillinger Escape Plan, Meshuggah, stuff that was like out there at the time, is suddenly you're reaching a wider audience. So timing is a huge factor too. But just to the original point, writing a genre fiction, crime fiction, I think it's I think it's the way to go if you want to publish at a high level, because it's really hard if you want to be out there, and find an audience for your work. You know what I mean?
Well, I like to start with your first book, Last Call for the Living, and it came out about 10 years ago, and that's definitely in that noir, hard-boiled, but dark. You know what I mean? Like there's very unsavory characters in that. For anyone out there who's not familiar with Peter's work, it's definitely, if you're a fan of like, maybe S. Craig Zoller or like George Pelicanos or something like that. It's like this gritty, dark crime with desperate characters and, anti-heroes and like all this stuff. So that whole, there's like a broad genre of stuff when you talk about crime thrillers and mysteries and stuff like that. But this is definitely on the grittier side of the spectrum. It's not like, it's dark, which is why I like it too, And there's another thing that I saw, which I haven't read, The Clay Eaters. Now, how does that fit into your catalog? The Clay Eaters.
Yeah, Clay Eaters was my third novel, and that was published in France just a few years ago. I went over there to do a book tour to support it and attended some book festivals too. And it did well. It hit a bestseller list over there, and by and large received, near unanimous, positive review. It was great. It was well received, and it fits in nicely with The Devil Himself. I look at Last Call for the Living, The Devil Himself, which is out in May here, and Clay Eaters as sort of a trilogy with respect to like rural noir. All of them are set in rural areas in Georgia. The Devil Himself and Clay Eaters in Middle and South Georgia. And the Clay Eaters is very much kind of an homage to Night of the Hunter, one of my favorite films and books too. An old classic black and white film starring
Robert Mitchum.
Robert Mitchum, yeah.
Yep.
Sorry, I started to blank there on that. And so, yeah, it's very much in that vein. Each book, the hinge or pivot point in the book focuses on just two disparate people meeting. It's just a common tool in writing fiction, and two people from different worlds sort of colliding together, and all of a sudden, based on that meeting and relationship, things are never the same for them after that. So that's sort of the device I'm working with in those three books. And that's why I feel like they're kind of a coherent trilogy if you were to read them, from starting with Last Call through Clay Eaters.
Now that's only available in Europe. That's not available in the States, like an English version of it.
Yeah, it's not available in English yet, only in France. And we'll see. If a lot of things, speaking of luck, depend on the Devil Himself and what opportunities, present themselves. There's been some film interest in the Devil Himself. If the book, hopefully performs well, just as far as sales is concerned, there's a very good chance I'll be able to publish Clay Eaters. But, this stuff's out of my control. It's hard. I had to learn to accept, if you put a lot of work into a piece of art, a film, an album, a book in my case, and you want the best for it, you're ambitious, you want to succeed, you want it to sell well, you want it to become a TV series on Netflix, I'm just being honest. Yeah. And when you just kind of don't hit those marks, or what you might just consider failure, it's tough to want to keep going. And that's what that 10-year stretch was, dealing with mentally. But thankfully in France, that book found an audience, and I have hope the Clay Eaters will be coming out next in the United States. And how, I don't know. I want to publish at a high level with a reputable publisher, so the book is widely distributed. I don't want to settle for self-publishing. I feel it's a fire hose of content, and you might be a 1 in a million of record or book or what have you that finds a way, but by and large, you're just going to disappear off the face of the earth if you go that route, in my humble opinion anyway. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, that you probably these days shelf space, just getting even, going to like a Barnes and Noble. I mean, I can't find any books that I want to read actually at Barnes and Noble anymore. It's like I go in there and they have absolutely no books besides like the classics, which I've already read. You know what I mean? Like if I go in there and look for, like an Adam Neville book or something like that as a horror writer that I really like, I won't find a single piece of work by him, even though he had two of his books made into films that are on Netflix. You still can't find anything. So if you're marginalizing yourself further by self-publishing, there's a way you're just going to be, you have to look for those releases. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's hard to get the word out on. It's hard to just will or manufacture buzz too for your book, and certainly when you publish with a reputable publisher that's distributed well. The Devil Himself is being distributed by Simon and Schuster, so it'll be out wherever books are sold. You'll be able to get it. And it gives this imprimatur of like respectability and validity to the work, which, it's like putting out a record on a well-known label,
Yeah.
whether in the metal world, whether it's Seasons of Mist or Relapse or what have you, people see that and go, oh, there's sort of a gatekeeper, at work here that people respond to, and they're probably more willing to check it out. But a writer friend of mine remarked that, like, it's especially in the events over the past couple of years, it's like, it's no wonder there's more dollar stores in America than bookstores. And when you go over to France, and like, there's a bookstore in every little town and village, and in Paris, there's something like, I might be mistaken, but I think at least 200 bookstores scattered throughout the city. People go to graduate school to learn how to be a bookseller, how to work in publishing on the production side. It's a noble profession over there to be a bookseller. And bookstores here, there's some great independent bookstores out there in America that are wonderful, but by and large their numbers are shrinking, and they're fighting tooth and nail every year to just stay afloat. And you walk into a lot of these stores, and it's no wonder it's mostly like, games and stationery, and the book inventory is a lot lower. Or for the bigger retailers, it's a retail job. Or if you find yourself in France, you meet a bookseller, it's like a noble trade, and that's really inspiring when you're over there. I feel like it's how things used to be in the United States, and they're not anymore. And it's kind of tragic for someone who loves books like I do. So
yeah, I agree with that, because I do. It's funny, just in general. I mean, I've been like touring this country and Europe since like the mid '90s, and in the United States, even just the overall landscape of our culture has, I'm going to be bold, and I'll say has somewhat degraded and become very homogenous in a lot of ways, where
sure.
You would stop off you drive across the country, and you would get off the exit, and it would be a different color, different flavor, depending on what part of the country you're in. You go west, it's different. Now it's like you get off at the exit, and it's like the same stores are there. You got a Starbucks, you got a Walmart, you got like a Chick-fil-A or whatever. It's all the same homogenous sort of thing. And I remember back in the old days finding like little bookstores like that. And the thing I miss the most are these like specialty places that you can go in there, and they'll have like, like a deep catalog of material, because I'm really into like horror and, like weird fiction and stuff like that. So finding all those authors on the shelf in a bookstore is so unusual these days. But back 10 or 15 years ago, you'd be able to find like an Arthur Machen, collection or something like that on a bookshelf somewhere in a specialty shop, but these days it's just, you got to mail order everything, and that's a real drag.
And on to that point too, you might be able to ask the bookseller that's their shop, and they're carrying titles that, obviously they want to carry inventory that's going to sell, but they're carrying stuff that they're really probably obsessed with and adore. So you could ask them about a particular writer, and just like having a cool record store that you can always go to, and maybe you get to know some of the people who work there, and they're always like, hey, if you like this, and all of a sudden you've got 6 new writers, 6 new bands to check out. And for people like us, who I know are obsessive collectors and always digging for art, that's part of the fun. And I miss that. I miss the bookstore culture, which when I was young was around. I don't feel it anymore in the United States. And in France, it's very much like that. Everywhere, there's bookstores that are very specialized, and you go in there, and if you're into new age stuff and self-help books, you can find a bookstore that tailors just to those interests and needs. And the one thing, I don't want to get into a debate about socialism or something, but France has laws on the books that limit the amount of discounting a giant retailer like Amazon can do. I think it's 5% or something. The details are online, but you can read about what the government's done there to help keep a Walmart or Amazon type behemoth from underselling and running French booksellers out of business, because it's such an important part of their culture. So people would just as likely I'll just order it from my neighborhood bookshop from, so-and-so who I've known for 5 years or whatever. And I'm not going to, as opposed to here, where it's like, I can get that for $15 cheaper on Amazon and get it tomorrow. Why wouldn't I order it from there? And an independent bookstore, they can't compete with that. They have to charge, a higher price or list price. And it's tragic, it's sort of the sort of this ugly side of capitalism, unfortunately, as it pertains to the arts, you know. So I don't know. I don't know how to reconcile it. I just have to make do with what's in front of me as a writer, and just, hope that my book finds a way in America. Because
I think it'd be cool if there was like the arts and capitalism like are almost mutually exclusive in some way.
Yeah, they're not very compatible, are they?
They're not compatible. It's like, I kind of feel like capitalism should work for like sewage pumps or something. You know what I mean? Like you should be able to go out and get like a really good price on like an ejector pump or something. You know what I mean? And then anything that's like arts related should have like a bottom line that you can't. All right, this is the minimum that you could accept money for. It's just so, because it's such a hard thing to be creative and actually exist. And can not even make a living, but to continue with what you're doing at a subsistence level. You know what I mean?
Even as a vocation, it can be absolutely demoralizing. And during this stretch, France really buoyed my spirits when I was just really, really, down and depressed over it all, because I put in a lot of work into these orphan novels sitting on my hard drive. And I'm not going to get into the reasons, that you have to play this game. You have to have representation, shop your work around. And there's so much luck involved too. You got to have talent, you got to work hard, but there's a lot of stuff out of your control that is really, again, it's not really a meritocracy. You're sort of playing the lottery when it comes to writing. You want to write publishable fiction. So, and that's why so many writers are clamoring to do TV and film, because that's where all the money is. And and everyone is praying that, the TV and film industry notices your work and options it or develops it, because that's how people are consuming storytelling now. I hate to sound so cynical, but the quality of fiction, I feel like every 10 years is starting to just like slowly devolve. And then the people who have the attention spans to sit and read a novel length, book, manuscript, that number is shrinking and shrinking. People would rather consume quick videos on YouTube or stream stuff at their whenever they feel like it. And it's disheartening, it really is. And I don't know if it's influencing how writers write, that they're trying to write stuff that is more applicable to film and television, and they're not writing fiction anymore, maybe. It just makes me depressed thinking about it.
Yeah, well, I like watching shows just as much as anyone does, but
sure, same here.
The value, and even like audiobooks, for example, that's not the same as reading, I mean? And I went on this big tirade in a past episode when, because we launched a mini series within the podcast about, that's dedicated to weird fiction. And that's going to be on those episodes are on the Patreon, stream, because that's not everybody's cup of tea.
Yeah.
But quarterly, I'm going to be donating to various literacy charities out there, because
cool.
I went on this big tirade about just the ability to read and how much secondary benefit your intellect gains by like looking at a page. There's these symbols, and your brain conjures those symbols into an image in your brain. And that losing that ability, I think, would be a huge, huge loss for the future of our culture, really. You know what I mean? To somehow just watch a video. Okay, I understand this. I don't think that's really going to cut it.
Yeah, I don't know what the human race is going to look like long after we're gone. If the ability and interest in reading text on a page and using your brain to, whether it's just you're consuming a story or you're reading about, I don't know, how to plant a crop on your farm or something, like it's scary to me. It's the stuff of sort of dystopian science fiction. But I grew up reading. I grew up around books. My father was a writer, and I don't get me wrong, adore film and television. I don't keep up as much as other folks do, my wife included. But when I do have free time, I just turn to a book. And also in this social age we live in too, where attention spans seem drastically shorter. I've even had to retrain myself where you just feel like you're always reaching for your phone every 10
Yes.
seconds. It's terrifying, and I catch myself doing it. This is years now of me like trying to temper this sort of new part of my brain, that wants to just hold this supercomputer in my hand and constantly check it for stuff, where it's like, put it on sleep, do not disturb, put it in another room, and then sit and read without interruption, even if it's 30 minutes. And I found that there was a time where it was very hard for me to read. I used to be able to sit and read for 5 hours in a row without thinking twice about it. I remember reading Stephen King's The Stand when I was 12, and I consumed it, I think, in like 3 days under like the cover in my bedroom and a flashlight, that sort of cliched kid reading a horror novel in the bedroom. And now I feel like having a kid and family, you get older, life gets complicated, but I almost had to retrain myself to read with purpose, without interruption, without distraction, without my brain kind of checking out on me and wondering like, hey, I wonder if I got a like on Twitter or some nonsense,
Sure. Yeah.
That it's scary, it's weird, but that's the reality we're in right now.
Have you read Marcus Aurelius's Meditations? That the Roman Empire Emperor Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it. I haven't read it in a while, but I know what you're talking about.
One of the key things which I've been trying to apply to my life is that those moments of just not taking any influence from your environment, you know what I mean, at the end of the day, where you turn off, obviously Marcus Aurelius didn't have Netflix or anything like that. So it was probably easier for him.
One can only imagine.
To go out and like stare, be in the environment and the beautiful Roman landscape and take that in without influence, without having his phone ringing or anything like that. But I've been really in the last because I had like a very several month period of distraction and depression and all this other stuff happening around me, and it was very pulling me out of myself. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So the last month or so, I've been really trying to pay attention to those sort of tenets that he had about how to a good way to go about your life. And I've been trying to have a 50, even if it's 15 minutes at the end of the day, where there's no phone, no computer, no screens, no shows, no music, just time inward, Mm-hmm. And I find that it's allowed me to concentrate more by doing that. Even for 15 minutes a day, I can focus on things a little bit better, and I get a better night's sleep and all this other stuff. So I don't know. There's a lot to these things, I believe.
No, there's a lot to what you're saying. And I don't know if culture-wide in the United States, even around the world, there's kind of maybe some pushback on the pressure and changing landscape and turmoil that's kind of seems to me connected to this new social age we live in, where it's either people either turning to the outdoors, whether it's first generation hunters and organic farmers or hunters, or people getting into hiking, camping, fishing, or meditation, just finding time every day to, like you said, almost put yourself in a sensory deprivation tank and look inward, try and calm your thoughts. There's a lot to that. I know transcendental meditation is really popular, being a big David Lynch fan. I spend more time in the woods than I probably should. Certainly in the fall during deer season, I'm always out hunting, and there's something, a lot of people might not get it, but there's something to sitting 25 feet up a white oak in the middle of the woods, a mile or hundreds of yards from my truck, and being immersed in nature I'm not looking at my phone, and it's off. And I tell you, there's something that, whether I harvest an animal or not, just that 10 hours or 12 hours or a weekend, if I'm camping out or staying at the hunting cabin, for example, recharges me in ways that I almost can't describe. And it's what you're saying on a micro level, just finding 15 minutes a day, where once a week I get out to the woods and I go spend a day tromping around chasing white-tailed deer. And it does wonders for my mental health. And in 2020 especially, we were all dealing with the stress of that year. Like, I don't know what I would have done without like the ability to get outdoors and, whether it's hike and hunt. So people are reacting and pushing back, I think, to it. But overall, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. It's going to look like Idiocracy,
I was thinking about that. I started thinking about that back even in 2016 when Trump took office. I was thinking about, or immediately thought about that Idiocracy movie,
Yeah, it was satire and reality just blur together, and you can't distinguish between an Onion article and like a headline from a major news source. We've crossed a Rubicon, and I don't know if there's any going back. Things still feel surreal every day. There's something sort of new and nonsensical and absurd to sort of try and process. And I don't know. Nothing feels the same after certainly 2016 and certainly after 2020. I haven't recalibrated myself to whatever it used to be.
Yeah. All right. So with The Devil Himself, that's available. That's out in France, and that's going to be released in the next couple of months here in the States. And you kind of went into why all that happened and what the background in that is. I read half of the book last night, and I found it to be like very compelling. Now, this is actually out of the 3 books that we discussed, like Last Call for the Living, The Clay Eaters, and Devil Himself. That's your second out of the 3, right? That you completed? Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm just, I wasn't aware that Clay Eaters even existed until I, did some research.
Yeah, things haven't gone conventionally for me. A lot of authors who maybe follow a conventional publishing path will put their book out in the States, and then simultaneously, literary agency that represents them, if there's interest, will sell rights overseas. France is a big market, certainly Germany, the UK, etc. And then that book, whatever book we're talking about, will then come out maybe a year later over there. And then by then you're on book 2 in the United States and book 3. So it's staggered, and they're always a little bit behind. But in my case, and I'm not alone, actually, my French publisher who specializes in American authors has a few writers who are in my position where their publishing record in the States has been spotty, or they've had a lot of difficulties, or just haven't had any luck. And, but they're thriving over there. So it's not unheard of. But yeah, it's a little wonky, man. It's hard to describe to people. I can't tell you for 10 years how many times every week almost I get an email or someone asking, hey, where can I get these books in English, or when are they coming out? And, at some point, I don't know, in the music world, there's no parallel. You can be like, yeah, this new Tunes record is only available in Portuguese right now. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
I actually sing it in Portuguese.
Yeah. You got Max Cavalera on there doing it.
Yeah, he's doing vocals on the record.
Yeah. But The Devil Himself, I finished the first draft of that book sometime in late 2012. I have the file on my computer, shelved it for a little bit, and then I sent it to my then editor at the publisher who released Last Call for the Living. They got no response. And so the book has always been intact basically since then. I've continued to work on it, prepped it for publication in France, and it's aged well, and I've continued to refine it. But yeah, I've just had it, this sort of baby, and I just haven't been able to get it out into the world until now. So it's a huge relief. It's just like, I'm relieved. I'm really excited. And I've accepted that this is all I can do. It's going out into the world, and whatever happens will happen, but it's all out of my control at this point, how people respond to it.
I just want to touch on your writing style a little bit. It's for lack of a better term, I would describe it as somewhat, laconic, with like these kind of short sentences, similar to like maybe John Fonte and like Ernest Hemingway, where it's like this kind of very rapid fire in some ways, and also sort of less descriptive in a way that it uses adjective. You know what I mean? So it is like an accounting of a situation. When I read it, it's like this kind of accounting of what the situation is, and that's how the story kind of progresses. And I'm just interested how you developed that writing style, like what might have influenced that, or was that something that you intentionally moved towards, or just basically how you came about that writing style?
Yeah, it came naturally to me. There's a lot of ways to skin a cat, and there's a lot of ways to write fiction. You can read old horror novels from the 80s, and they've got a lot of purple prose, and there's just lots of detail. High fantasy is certainly these
Yeah.
gigantic books, and I'm a fan of the genre. But there's just a lot of ways to approach fiction writing, and for me, it felt natural intuitively as I was learning in my sort of apprenticeship period and reading regional writers. I love a lot of Southern writers, who, by the way, John Fonte, Charles Bukowski, um, Raymond Carver, these writers were all playing stylistically, I think, in the same sandbox. And some of these writers would be like Larry Brown, Ron Rash, certainly Flannery O'Connor, who could write elegantly as well. But for me, the big tactic is this sort of classic, writing method of show versus tell. It's like writing a screenplay. I like clean, precise sentences. Every now and then, maybe get a little showy and write an elegant or lyrical line, but I prefer to just describe what's going on, define your characters through their dialogue and their actions, and pack as much subtext into your prose as possible, and into the dialogue as possible. I love trying to do that. Just get away with as much as possible with as little as possible on the page. So there's depth there for the reader to explore, as opposed to just explaining everything, whether it's simple. Your character's mad. Do you say they're mad, or do you have them pick up an ashtray and throw it through the drywall? What's more effective? And I think for the reader, it's the latter. Have them throw a damn ashtray through the drywall. So that's an example of like kind of what I'm trying to do: simple, precise, clean sentences and language. So
Yeah, the narrative moves along like very at a really good pace, I think. Like I was saying, I read like half the novel last night, and I probably would have finished it had I didn't have to go to band practice. But yeah, I'm probably going to knock the rest of it out after this afternoon.
Well, I was only going to give you one excuse for not reading a full-length novel in a night. Band practice is the one excuse. So you're okay, Mike. You get a pardon there.
It's all that meditation, man. It allows me to focus more. So yeah, I'm good for 300 pages a night.
That's impressive, man. Yeah, but that type of writing, it's like James Ellroy too, with his sort of they call it a telegraphic style, very short sentences, sometimes just subject noun, that you can really breeze through stuff like that. Whereas other types of writers, even writers I adore, but their styles are much different, and they can be really they can really demand your attention. But yeah, that just comes naturally to me. I'm not trying to force the issue there. It's just, this is how I've learned to write and I'm comfortable with. And I feel like when writers try and not be themselves as far as how they execute a story, it shows. It shows every time.
Yeah, I'm always interested in that because I attempt to write as well. And it's just stylistically, I'm always interested to see where people are coming from with that. And it's funny you mentioned Ellroy, because when I read a James Ellroy novel, I like break out in a sweat. I think it's like you read his prose. It's like smoking crack or something like that. And you're reading, and you're like, oh my, you're like, your heart's beating fast, you're sweating, and it's crazy,
Yeah, I read his last novel. I read it last year sometime, Perfidia.
Stormfront, is that what it's
called? The next to last novel. I haven't read Stormfront yet. Perfidia, though, the precursor to that, and it was a wild, crazy work of genius, but absolutely exhausting.
Yes.
After a while, his the story itself, his style was, I felt like I was just getting hit repeatedly in the face with a hammer. Just these like sharp angular sentences that just never stop, and it just goes and goes and goes. It was relentless. So yeah, I appreciate that type of writing and dabble in it. But I've tried to find my sweet spot, and every writer has to search for that, as far as how they do their thing.
Earlier on, when we started talking, I wanted to establish like some kind of context about like, where, what your background was, and, you live in Georgia and you're native to that, because your material all is very regional oriented. Now, are any of these places actual places, or are they like like some of these towns like aggregates of other places that you've been to or people that you know, and that sort of environment that you're working in? Is it, you
Yeah.
know,
No, I've in The Devil Himself, for example, when you get to the end of the book, you'll see right past the right before the acknowledgments, I was compelled to put in an author's note where I do let the reader know that the setting, Trickham County, is fictional. I've completely made it up, but it is nestled in a very particular part of the state, which is kind of Southwest Georgia, where I spent a lot of time, and Middle Georgia as well. So it draws on real landscape features. I am talking freely about the city of Atlanta too, but I'm taking tons of liberties, and that's just basically at this point creative license. I have my own embellishments in there, and that's for the reader either to accept or reject. But I have more fun inventing my own sort of geography and drawing on real life stuff, drawing from real influences. The book opens with our young character, our young girl Maya is running from some bad guys. They want to kill her, and she eventually runs through an area that I hunt pretty often. It's actually one of my most productive deer hunting spots. I've killed hogs there too, but I'm basically describing a place that I have spent hundreds of hours, and so I'm drawing on stuff like that as far as the natural world in the book for sure. But I mix and match stuff. I'll make up the name of a town and put it right next to a real place in Georgia. And I think it's my freedom to do that. As long as I'm honest and persuasive with how I execute that, I don't think the reader is ever going to, suddenly get jarred out of it. Maybe a Georgia reader will pick up on these things and go, that place isn't real, but that's fine. That's fiction,
I enjoy that. Like, I like when there's license taken with, it doesn't have to be so literal all the time with locations and, settings, things like that.
Yeah, you can get kind of tied down to that and beholden to real places if you're not careful. But some writers love doing that. There's a writer who I share a French publisher with, William Boyle, who writes about Brooklyn, where he's from. And he just described Brooklyn with so much sort of love and fondness and accuracy. So, and I'm pretty sure he's very accurate regarding, of everything from street names to neighborhoods. So he takes that route. Whereas in my case, I'm sort of inventing my own town and my own county. I might be wrong there. Bill might get upset and want to correct me, but that's an example where the writers can do it fantastically well, write about their home and do it, real streets, everything is accurate. That bank is there, that drugstore is there, that is where City Hall is. And you go there and you're like, wow, they nailed it. This is exactly like it is in the book. I think that's cool too. There's, like I said, a lot of ways to skin a cat as far as setting in a novel.
Well, one of the things that comes to mind about that aspect of writing is, I recently spent some time around my hometown and met up with someone that I knew when I was in high school. And even though we lived in the same town, grew up in the same town, our perspective on that place are two completely different things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't remember it being anything like this other person's recollections are. So I like to approach when I read something that is like taking place in a known location. I'm like, oh yeah, this is that trip of like, yeah, this is how I saw this place through my eyes, and maybe someone else sees it differently, and I always really trip out on that stuff. Like when I'm reading about an actual place, and I was thinking about that a lot over the holidays, really,
Yeah. Sort of the tried and true of advice for fiction writers is write what you know. And it makes a lot of sense. For me, I like to extend that. The great Montana writer once told me when we were in France on a book tour event together, that the goal is to write as honestly and persuasively as possible. Now, you might be making up the Seven Kingdoms or something, or might be writing high fantasy. And so these rules have to be interpreted differently if you're doing genre fiction. But by and large, I feel like it's a great axiom to follow and just always keep in the back of your head, whether it's you're writing about your hometown or you're making up a town, but it's very similar to the one you grew up in, or I'm making up a landscape feature or some deep backwoods in Georgia. And it's fiction on the page, but I'm thinking of some woods I've actually run around in. So, that's like the North Star, the guiding light, not only to write what you know, but try and just be honest and persuasive with what you're doing. Because I think if you fail there, the writer's going to know it. And that carries over to everything. Your characters, dialogue, if you want to write a female character as a male, or if you're going to write about a parent or a person of color or anything, like you've got to make sure that you're being honest, and or else you can, you'll be called out for it. You can be criticized for it, and it weakens the story, weakens the writing itself. So yeah, it's hard, it's tricky, but it just takes time and a lot of failure, and eventually you figure it out.
Now, for example, the devil himself, the characters in that book, they're very, like, there's a lot of depth to those particular characters. Maya, Leonard, Lucio, and there's like so what comes first within your process, the character ideas or the narrative? You know what I mean? Like, while you're pondering these creative ideas, do the characters spring out first, or does the story that the characters are they're involved with, does that come first?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, because every writer's different. Yes, 10 fiction writers, they'll give you 10 different answers. A lot of them have a plot in mind, and they might also want to plot out the novel really, really meticulously, but they have a plot in mind. There's a bag of money discovered in a ceiling by a contractor, and then from there they plot out some really cat and mouse type of story, for example. Everyone's different. I'm a real visual writer, and I usually have images in my head, and the devil himself started with was inspired by someone in my wife's family, or stories that people in my wife's family, in-laws, about a local man from decades ago who sort of trolling people before trolling was a thing. He had a reputation as being kind of like a little baddie, kind of, he was a bootlegger for a little while, and he, for a week or so, rode around town with this mannequin in the front seat of his car. And he did it as a lark. Like I said, he was sort of trolling, but you imagine in the 1970s in a South Georgia town, this was like kind of, people were like, that dude's crazy. It really got riled people up. And I had this image of an old man. I had this image when I heard about that years ago, of an old man in a car with a mannequin, and the mannequin is wearing a dress and has makeup on and a wig, like she's really done up. And he's actually going somewhere with the mannequin, and he wants to, like, they're going to the movies, for example. And from there, I just started asking all these practical questions. What's the story here? Does he live with the mannequin? Does he talk to it? How long has this arrangement been going on? What's the backstory there? And from there, the novel just kind of starts to, like I said, you're peeling back layers of an onion trying to get to the core truth. And I don't plot at all. I don't outline at all. Excuse me. I better plot, or else my book wouldn't. I don't outline at all. So everything is by the seat of my pants, and it's a lot of false starts and groping around in the dark. But you eventually find your way. Every book, though, it starts with an image like that. Claytor's is the same way. It's this guy falling from a tree stand and dying, which is very common. I hunt from tree stands, so I'm climbing up trees 20 to 30 feet routinely to hunt from up in the air with a bow or rifle. And it's, if you don't take safety precautions, every year there are tragedies. Hunters fall and break their neck, break their back, or die. So I had this image of this hunter falling in slow motion in the woods, and that the only sound for a moment being him hitting the floor, hitting the duff. And that's Claytor's. That's how it got started in my head. So both books, it's yes, just an image, like a film in my mind, and I need to figure out what's going on.
Actually, the outline bit was one of the questions I had. So I guess you don't work with outlines. That's, you just
no.
kind of, yeah.
I mean, if you were to look at my notes for the devil himself, I'll keep legal pads, and I prepped the book for publication in France. It went through an editing and refining process, and then copy editing and final pass and editing for the United States. I worked with an amazing editor named Lily Golden, and she really helped with. I kind of compared the editing process and copy editing and final pass. I look at it almost like the mixing and mastering stage from the music world. This is where you're dialing knobs up and down and getting the levels just right. You might catch inconsistencies and stuff, but the book really benefited from that, but no, there was never for the devil himself a very meticulous outline. Some writers will have storyboards and big lengthy, you know, every step is sort of planned out, and I don't have that at all. If you were to look at my notebooks for Devil himself, you'd think I was probably like institutionalized in a psychiatric hospital. I mean, there's notes and margins that don't make sense, but to me, stuff written in shorthand, just you go down rabbit holes of research, and then it's all about picking the right details that serve your story. So no, it's very kind of haphazard and kind of crazy how I go about writing these things. You know, it's just the way that works for me. I'm like Michael Gira from the Swans, I think, only without the band to yell at. No, I'm kidding. I love Swans, but I feel like there's a lot of chaos in how he creates Swans records, and I feel like there's a lot of chaos, at least internally, as far as how I try and make these novels up. So.
Did you see that documentary that came out a little while ago?
I loved it. I've got a Swans tattoo, and I've been a Swans fan since the late '90s when I got hip to all of this stuff, to what he was doing just after they broke up, and then he started launched Angels of Light, and Young God really got cranked up. And I turn to him constantly. I have weird sources of inspiration. You know, I have writers I adore. I have Mount Rushmore writers. I read a lot of nonfiction. I read a ton of outdoor writing, but I draw, inspiration from music, especially too, in ways that just don't make sense. You might not see it on the page, but like a Swans record or something, or a Lightning Hopkins album or something. I draw more inspiration from that for writing than I would like an actual writer, another writer.
Now, do you work with the same editor on each one of your the three novels that you have, like to trim it down from a manuscript into the published final version of the work?
Yeah, in my kind of dilapidated publishing career, I've had different editors so far for the two books that are coming out or out in the United States. I worked with an editor with Last Call for the Living, of a man named Bob Gleason, who actually edited my father at that publisher for many, many years, a couple decades actually. Then for Devil himself, I worked with an editor at Arcade Publishing, and she was, absolutely brilliant, wonderful to work with, really helped elevate the book. And then in France, I've worked with the same editor, Oliver Gallmeister, for Last Call for the Living, book 1, The Devil Himself, book number 2, and The Clay Eaters. And then eventually soon, my 4th novel will be coming out in France. So I've worked with him on each book, but that's a different process in France compared to the United States, different markets, different audiences. The book is going to translation, so there's different concerns and points of emphasis for an English reader compared to a French reader. So there's differences there. A lot of writers, though, have been with the same editor for years, and they have great working relationships. But yeah, I haven't had that yet. I'd like that, but it hasn't worked out that way.
How hard is it on the ego to go through the editorial process? Like, I've often wondered that, to have someone give you notes on this thing that you put so much time and effort in and spend all this time with, and is part of kind of you really,
Mm-hmm.
like to have and this is projection, like my own ideas, this stack of paper with red lines through it and notes and all this other stuff. Like how
Sure.
how do you deal with that? Like, how do you work through something like that?
Yeah, I feel like if you're working with a reputable publisher and a good editor, you have to sort of, not to quote a cliched sort of athlete expression, but you have to trust the process. And if you trust your editor, you know that they want what's best for the novel. So everything from maybe just a simple line edit suggesting the use of a different word, or catching a typo or an inconsistency or something, to big picture, see the forest from the trees story elements. I feel like I love the editing process. Devil himself went through dozens of drafts. I lost count. You just continue to refine it. It's like making a record, man. You could probably sit there and mix it within an inch of its life and never let it go. There comes a point where you've got to cut the cord and just send it off into the world. But I welcome it. Maybe if you're I am a sensitive guy and very delicate. But,
Dude, I hear you, man.
yeah,
I
but
understand.
you have to submit, if you trust your editor, that they want what's best for the novel. And I enjoy that part. Some writers might be very sensitive to criticism. And if it's delivered certainly harshly, it can hurt your ego. It can definitely, you can internalize it. But the heavy lifting is the hardest part of writing a novel for me. That first draft, if you finish the manuscript and you have this big, ugly mess on your hands, that's the hard part. And I try and get through that as quick as possible. And then when you get in there and start fine tuning it is, for me, the really enjoyable part. And to get perspective from other readers, from an editor, is invaluable, because you have no perspective at all. It's like the same equivalent if you're a film editor and you're in post-production and you're trying to edit your film and you've got some other people there. You got other eyes on the material. You're in the studio with Eric Rutan or something, and you've got his input, and you've got maybe he's got an engineer or assistant, and you can say, like, what do you think of that? And then all of a sudden you've got 3 or 4 opinions on a mix. You got 3 or 4 opinions on a guitar solo. And if you're there and you trust those people, it's invaluable, So
Oh yeah,
I love
for sure.
I love it. I welcome it. And The Devil Himself is a better book, I think, for just trusting that process, trusting my editor, and just going with it.
Actually, it's funny. The last couple of years of Tombs, our songwriting process is becoming more like that in some ways. Like, I mean, I could show you a screenshot of my hard drive, and there's like 7, 9, 10 versions of songs, and they're all like slightly different. Like, I'm going into this a little bit more on the podcast, like some of the Patreon episodes about writing the records, writing music or whatever. And it's like a very obsessive process with the editing of songs these days, where it's like, here's my first pass at the thing, and then revision number 10 is like maybe the one that we end up recording. And even at that point, it changes still, So, and I kind of like that too, because I think back when I first started writing music, it was like, no, this is the song. It has to be this way because this is, and then you record it and you listen back and it's like, well, maybe we played part B like too many times or something like that. And
yeah, it's a balancing act. I think, to draw a parallel to writing, you could have maybe a hardcore pulp writer, maybe they're writing in different genres, but they're the type of old school writer where back in the day, like go back to the 1950s or 60s, where writers could make a living, like just banging out like pulp novels, dime store pulps. My father did it, in the 1950s. At one point he told me, my dad was writing under the pseudonym Steve Burkeen, that he was banging out these like old like pulp crime novels. He's like, at one point I was making more money than my father, who was an engineer, of writing pulp novels, And so you can bang something out in 3 weeks and just send it out the door without a second glance. You could write records that way too. But the older I get too, and as I've gone through this apprenticeship period trying to learn the craft of writing fiction, where I prefer, you can disappear into a black hole of this, but editing, getting into the granular detail of scenes, what your word choice, injecting subtext into scenes, just by like having a character do something, an action or a line of dialogue, and just injecting tons of subtext into those moments, you can get really cerebral with it. And the balance is, and I like that though, you work slower, but the finished product I think is much, much better. And the parallels in the music world, you could sit there, you might have a bridge and you want to have some weird noise stuff going on, and you can mull over what instruments and how you mix it, and how many tracks you're going to just stack on top of each other, and how crazy you're going to get with it. And that's just one little moment in one little song. And in fiction writing, it's the same. One little section where your character's saying something of the utmost importance, and how do they deliver that line, and what words do you use, and have you used these words before, and are you repeating yourself? And it goes on and on and on. So you have to learn as an artist, where do I draw the line? When is this right, and do I let it go, or do I just sit here working on this book for 10 years and it never gets done? So
plenty of those too. Definitely.
Sure, for sure.
Yeah. One of the things I was curious about was crime fiction is, it's in some ways in the eyes of what today's people might see things, might be a little problematic in the use of women get roughed up and, there's like stereotypes and all this other stuff. Has that ever entered into the editorial process with you?
Oh boy, you opened up a can of worms, man.
No, I'm just curious about that, just because, like, I can imagine these. I mean, I'm, obviously I like to let creative people do what they want, but I imagine these days, like, people always want to dip their finger in somehow.
Man, a lot has changed, in a lot of the arts in general, but just to speaking to writing fiction, like crime fiction, you're seeing big sea changes as far as maybe what's acceptable, or writers, you feel like you have to be careful about how you write characters, for fear of being accused of, I would say, perhaps something you're not. But I don't know if the readers are more sensitive to this, but there's, you have to kind of play by new rules, maybe. You have to be respectful, certainly, of certain sensitivities, but there comes a point where it just gets absurd. And I come from the attitude, when it comes to art, I want crime fiction to be dangerous, and I don't want anyone telling me what I can and cannot write about, because we're on a slippery slope to censorship there at that point. But it all goes back to me, to what the fantastic Montana writer Pete Fromm told me once in France, is you're honest and persuasive with the writing, none of this matters. The reader is not thinking about you. The writer is invisible at this point. Your characters are these living, breathing things. Whether it's how women are treated in your book, or different people from different racial backgrounds, or different whatever you have, sexual persuasions, all of these things now you have to balance in how you're portraying these people on the page. But on top of that, though, I am Puerto Rican. My mother's from Puerto Rico. On my mother's side, they were all born from Puerto Rican. But I don't identify as anything. I'm just a dude, and I like books, and I like metal, and I like hunting, and I'm a simple man, dude. I'm kind of ignorant in that respect. But it's like, am I only allowed to write about, like, middle-aged dudes who like craft beer and black metal and guns? Because that's a boring book. I want to be able to write about whoever I want to write about, and explore people from different backgrounds, from urban environments, from rural environments, different age classes. I don't want any obstacles in my way as far as what I write about. But my challenge as a writer is do it honestly, do it persuasively, and be a compelling storyteller. Then these things do not matter at all, because the reader's not going to worry about, what my background is. I will be invisible, and that's the end game.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I feel like the consumer of the art, like the person who reads or listens or appreciates the work, is not concerned with those things. It's these weird tiny masters of today that are, like, really concerned about it, like critics and people who are, like, trying to gatekeep this kind of ideology, and I don't think that the consumer out there really cares.
Yeah, I'd like to think not. Certainly there are really popular crime fiction writers who, I don't know if it's because they sell a lot of books, but they, are able to write what they want, and these things, these criticisms aren't levied at them, or maybe other writers. I don't know. It's a very lightning rod of an issue, for sure. And I don't know. I've had to deal with it a little bit with Devil himself, as far as just sanding down a few things to at the suggestion of my editor, and I was fine with it. It was all fair game for me, but ultimately I did have a line in the sand, and I wasn't going to cross it for the fear of neutering my book. And we never got there, and it's cool. I don't know how people will react to the novel and the story, if they're going to see things that are there that I never intended, or their own personal prejudices and biases are going to come into play, and they're going to, things are going to bother them that really shouldn't. My problem, Mike, is that nothing offends me. Absolutely nothing offends me at all. I don't care what it is. But I do have a strong moral compass. I know right from wrong. And I don't have any critical sense at all. I just like stuff, or I don't. things are cool, good, things are not cool, I don't care for it. And I just kind of like, I just operate on that level. So it's tough for me to deal with all this stuff because again, like if some people get outraged by something, I don't get outraged by anything, you know.
Yeah, I'm the
When it
same
comes to
boat.
when it comes to the arts, I'm just like, you know, I'm not into it, and I just like move on, carry on, and just keep seeking out art that I dig, you know, without, you know, trying to make some writer or musician or filmmaker's life miserable or going online and you know, joining a mob or something. I just ignore it, you know, let the market deal with like with bad art, you know, and carry on. So I don't know. I'm the last person to even comment on it because I'm one of those weirdos who just doesn't get worked up over this stuff. So
Yeah, you and I are on the same page with that for sure. So where, if you want, can you share some details about, you know, where people can check to see when the pre-order for your book is available? Like what are the channels, you know, for all that sort of stuff?
yeah, man. The Devil Himself is out May 3rd. It's available for pre-order now anywhere books are sold, from Books A Million and Barnes and Noble to Amazon to your local independent bookstore. They can go right into their computer and pre-order it through their distributors. You can order signed copies as well. If you go to peterfarris.com, there's a link up at the top says signed copies from Foxtail. That's my local bookstore here. I'm going to be doing a signing at in May. And the product page at Simon & Schuster has links to every retailer on planet Earth. So the book will be out worldwide with the exception of France too. So it's coming out in the United Kingdom, Australia, in English, Canada. So it'll be available worldwide in English in May. Yeah, so I'm pretty excited. But peterfarris.com will get you anywhere. So, or just Googling the Devil Himself, and you'll get a hit for me.
So that's the landing page, peterfarris.com. And
Yeah.
are there any social links that you want to share for people to follow you?
Yeah, I'm on. I've been on Instagram for a while, and I kind of hang out there more than I care to admit. And I sort of rejoined the fray at Twitter and Facebook, and I'm there and sharing stuff that's mostly book related, but it's like the Wild West. And I yearn for the days when writers were invisible and, you know, in the background. And but I'm on all social media platforms, so you can look me up, PJ Farris, author PJ Farris over at Twitter, author Peter Farris on Facebook, and then I'm just Peter_Farris on Instagram. So you can find me just about with a search.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah, I follow you on Instagram. I stay away from Twitter. Twitter is like, I have a Twitter account, but it's like auto posted. I don't ever read anything else on Twitter, man. That's
Yeah, I'm being very like cautious. I feel like I'm curious about crystal meth, and I'm just trying to like only dabble in it because it's like the Wild West for me. But it's very active writing community on there. A lot of very supportive writers, especially in the crime mystery world, and you know it's cool. But I'm trying to go slow.
yeah, dude. Totally. Well, thanks for joining us. And yeah, I'm excited, man. I'm gonna head out. I'm gonna pre-order that book, and you know, looking forward to it because I want to get a hard copy as well. You know.
Yeah, I should add hardcover is what it will be available as a hardcover and ebook wherever books are sold. And yeah, if you go to my website, Foxtail Bookshop in Woodstock, Georgia, will have signed copies in May. So the book will drop, and anything you order from them they'll hold until I sign it, and then they'll ship it out. So.
You know what actually might help people with you know, keeping the publishing industry alive somewhat is, I guess, the ebooks, you know, and Kindle and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I just recently started using Kindle like on my iPad in the literally in the last 2 months because it started where I came across something called Dark, which is like a weird fiction publication, and it was like $1 a month. And it's a you know, it's basically a magazine, you know, literature. And I'm like, oh yeah, Kindle. Oh yeah, I have this app. So I started reading the magazine every month on Kindle. And then from there, I started actually trying out other authors that I read it that were in that magazine that had stuff on Kindle. So it wasn't like an investment so much into putting something on my shelf by something I might try it out and not really enjoy it and be like, oh, well, I have this book now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And but yeah, Kindle is a really good way, I think, to sample other authors' writing that you're not familiar with, because it's they're a little bit cheaper than buying a hard copy.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly, like the devil himself, the ebook options are at reduced cost. So that's a great way, especially if you're running out of space, or maybe you live in an apartment. Books can stack up. I've got that problem. If I were to turn my computer around, you'd see it firsthand. So like I have no problem with how anybody consumes my work. I don't care where they buy it to each his own. I certainly would support, buying a book through an independent bookstore if you have one in your neighborhood, or one locally that you hit up from time to time. Help those independent bookstore owners out. But it's not my place to say, and I'm just grateful if anyone would want to buy the book at all and share a kind word for it online. That goes a long way for writers too. After you buy the book, if you like it, leave a review on Amazon, leave a review on Goodreads, tell a friend, take a picture of it and post it on Instagram. This book knocked me out. Man, that helps writers so much, because it's so hard if you don't have a lot of publicity. You're not anointed by your publisher, and they sort of get you out there and get you all these opportunities, to promote your work, to manufacture buzz, to get word of mouth going. It's so hard. Yeah, and I'm relying on the book being good and people just recommending it to each other. I'm proud of it, but it's really hard for me to do it on my own. So that goes a long way. If you buy books, take that extra step online and, share it in some manner on social media.
Thanks a lot, Pete. I appreciate that. And so yeah, enjoy the rest of your day, man.
Yeah, you too, man. Thanks for having me on, Mike. Take care.
Dude, that was awesome. And appreciate your time. Mm-hmm. And hold on a second, this window here. If you have an idea for a like an outro track, some sort of, whatever, a song, if you have it as an MP3 or something like that, send it for like a preferred like outro,
Yeah. Do you have copyright concerns when it comes to stuff, or do you just no?
No, because I usually have like some other audio over it,
Yeah. Have you unless you've used it recently, what about Black Medicine from Take the Stairs to Hell with all of us on it?
I haven't used that. That's all right. Great. Yeah, that's awesome. I'll do that.
Fuck yeah, man. Use that one.
Okay. No, that's perfect. That's probably a great recommendation to do that. Yeah, totally, man.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your time, Pete.
Yeah, man. Listen, if you want to have me on when the book drops in May, this is a real pleasure, man. I'm happy to come on anytime you want to talk. So
I was thinking to do that, because that way it'll get in front of people, and they'll, it's a current sort of thing. So maybe after the book is out, we'll talk again.
Yeah, I'm going to be doing a few podcasts around the release. I've been invited to, and some bookstore events, and I'd be happy just to go in maybe to more detail on the story and stuff, and the research for the book. I could definitely fill up an hour talking about that sort of thing too, So yeah, absolutely, man. Just let me know.
Right on. Yeah, it didn't really make that much sense to dig too deeply into it now, because the book's not available in this country yet.
All right, no, it's perfect.
All right, have a good day.
All right, cool, Mike. Take care. Later.
Sure. Bye.